Amy, let me tell you about a magical place that is so exactly designed to be enclosed space, year-round fun for the whole family that I bet you already know what I'm going to say before I even say the name. Let's say it together on three. 1, 2, 3. Great Wolf Lodge. You got it, Amy.
My kids loved Great Wolf Lodge when we went. You probably already know that it has a huge indoor water park with a wave pool, lazy river, a bunch of massive water slides. But then your pack can hit the other attractions because, wait, there's more.
Great Wolf Lodge has adventure-packed attractions like Magi Quest, a live-action game kids can play throughout the lodge, plus the Northern Lights Arcade. Spent some quality time there, so your kid who loves the lazy river and your kid who loves fantasy games will both have a great time.
Great Wolf Lodge also offers great dining options and complimentary daily events like nightly dance parties, all under one roof. Unpack the car once and you're settled in to have fun. And with 22 lodges across the country, you're always a short drive away from adventure.
We've both had such great times at Great Wolf Lodge, so bring your pack together at a lodge near you. Learn more at greatwolf.com and strengthen the pack. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Fresh Take from What Fresh Hell, Laughing in the Face of Motherhood. This is Margaret.
And this is Amy. Today, we're talking to Irin Carmon. She is an award-winning senior correspondent at New York Magazine, where she covers gender, law, politics, and more. She is the co-author of the New York Times bestseller, Notorious RBG, and the author of a new book, which we'll be talking about today, Unbearable, 5 Women and the Perils of Pregnancy in America. Welcome, Irin.
Thank you so much for having me.
Let's start with a quote from the introduction of the book. For much of American history and medicine, artificial categories of good and bad pregnancies, celebrated or stigmatized, wanted or unwanted, medicalized or, quote, unquote, natural, healthy or unhealthy, planned or unplanned, have obscured the true complexities of people's lives. So much of this book is a portrait of different ways people come to pregnancy, different experiences that people have with pregnancy. You talk about your own pregnancy in the book. Tell us what brought you to write this book.
So as a reporter for about 12 years before I started writing the book, I was focusing on reproduction in America. Mostly in the beginning, I started out covering legal battles around abortion. Then I had the opportunity to report all over the country at how different kinds of laws and structures were affecting people's actual lives. And I was always interested, in all the different kinds of experiences of pregnancy, not just people in a situation where they want to end it. But we know that that was this huge fault line in American medicine and law and politics. And I was really interested in all the different feelings that people had about it, no matter where they stood, and the fact that everyday people's lives were getting caught in this. But it wasn't until I got pregnant myself that I really felt that both the intimate potential violation of somebody making a decision for you about your pregnancy, and also an extreme sense of solidarity with people in all other situations of pregnancy. For me, I was so excited to be pregnant. I had a blessedly short bout with infertility. I got pregnant through IUI. This is not in the book, but just in terms of context, I was really excited to be pregnant when the time was right for me. And I had an easy pregnancy, a textbook pregnancy, and then the world shut down for COVID. So I was about halfway through my pregnancy in March 2020 in New York City in the epicenter. And as a reporter, I started covering the things that were happening in hospitals in those early panicked days of COVID. So I was scared that I was going to have to give birth for the first time by myself. I was going to have a mask. The first part did not end up being true for me. The second part, I think I ripped off my mask at a certain point, but people were getting tested for COVID on admission and then potentially getting separated from their birth companions. They were potentially getting separated. I wrote about women who were getting separated from their newborns because they tested positive for COVID. The environment was of fear and panic, and I was afraid and I was panicked. And the only thing I knew how to do was to report on it. And then I also found myself going down this journey of reading about pregnancy in a different way. So in the beginning, I had been like, I'm just going to show up and let the doctor do what they're due, pick the right doctor, it'll work out. Suddenly, I was very afraid of going to the hospital because I was scared. At that point, we really didn't know very much about how COVID could affect a pregnancy or somebody who is pregnant. And so I just thought, what can I do to spend the least amount of time in the hospital if it's without in my control at all? Now, we all know 99% of the time it's not within your control. But I started reading things that I had been avoiding because I thought they weren't for me, like books about midwifery, because I thought, well, if I could labor at home for as long as I can and just come into the hospital, then I will only, and at that point, they were discharging people after one night if they had a vaginal birth. And so I became obsessed with this project of becoming as self-sufficient as possible if it was within my control. And in the end, I was really lucky because I did have a very fast and furious birth. And I was able to only be in the hospital for one night. And we were healthy and we were safe. And yet I felt like I had so many questions about the way that the system worked when you were pregnant. COVID almost showed us what it looks like when it's ripped apart because there were overworked healthcare providers. They were running out of supplies. There was fear of death. People were not going to hospitals because they were afraid. They were doing unplanned home births, which was also something that I was reporting on, or unanticipated home birth. Oh, and I almost went to a hospital that was closer to my house that was known for having midwives. And I live in New York City, and was a public hospital that didn't have a great reputation among people who had private insurance, but they had created this kind of bubble of midwifery. And I thought, well, maybe I should be going there because another crazy thing that happened during my pregnancy is that there were Black Lives Matter protests in the city. The mayor instituted a curfew that shut down the bridges and the tunnels, and there were checkpoints. And so I was suddenly worried that I was going to have a baby at a checkpoint. So I looked for a hospital that was closer to me. I looked at this hospital, Woodhull. People said, counterintuitively, this is an amazing place. They ended up lifting the checkpoints and the curfew before I had my daughter. We kept to our plan. We were lucky that it all worked out. But then 2 weeks after my daughter was born, a young woman named Asia Semple went to Woodhull and died during the course of receiving anesthesia that she didn't want. And I just thought, how did something like this happen in a place that I was told was a place where, in particular, low-income women, Black women, which were two ways to describe her, although not the only ways, could be treated with respect in their births. And so that set me on this journey of reporting. And then the second pregnancy that I had with my second daughter in 2022 was during the overturning of Roe v. Wade. And the Dobbs decision happened while I think it was leaked when I was 6 months pregnant. I think I was 8 months pregnant when it was finalized. And I just felt like we are going to see effects of this across people's pregnancy decisions, not only people who are seeking abortions. And I also feel this deep connection with somebody who has, even though I live in a blue state and this will not be a decision or a series of laws that will affect me, I wanted to figure out how to tell a story that showed how deeply interconnected all of these different situations of pregnancy were. And those were the starting points. And although the book is not a memoir, I felt like my experience in my pregnancies and as a mom made me want to tell stories of other people that showed that it's not you over there, you were the good mom, you did not have a substance problem or an addiction problem during your pregnancy, so nothing bad will happen to you. Or you made all the right decisions about what doctor and what hospital to go to. No, this is a broader systemic problem. And so the women in my book, 5 of them who we followed through the course of their, in some cases, pregnancies and in some cases fighting to make pregnancy care better, are up against forces that are so much bigger than just their individual decisions.
Right.
You said something before about I'm in a blue state, so, you would think these laws won't affect you. And I think that's part of what's so hard about this moment, right? These laws are made sometimes by people who don't understand what it means to be 6 weeks pregnant, that you really could only have known you're pregnant for 2 weeks, whatever. We won't get into the details, but it is, people don't know what they don't know. And people also think that the right kind of pregnancy, as you say, done the right way, or the pregnancy that is had in a blue state, or the pregnancy that is had with healthcare, will be fine. You're going to get the healthcare you need. And you were talking about, the crazy special details that applied to your first pregnancy. And I just was thinking that each of us have talked about our own childbirth stories. Every childbirth story has crazy, and then you wouldn't believe what happened then. They're never, no two are the same. There's always some extenuating circumstance and something that goes sideways for a moment, but then it's okay until it doesn't. And so I think that it's been easy for a lot of us to sit outside this and say, but this won't matter for me or my kids or my daughters. But yes, it will. But then very suddenly, some little thing, a butterfly beats its wings, and it really, really does matter.
Well, and of course, the starting point for the writing of the book was the broader impact of Roe v. Wade being overturned. But the stories in the book, in many cases, they happened before or they're not related to the Supreme Court's decision. And that's because, as you say, no two pregnancies are alike, but that, there is the crazy alchemy of each individual pregnancy. And then there is what hospital can you go to, or who's your provider, or what are the laws, or, there's both preventable and non-preventable things. Each person is kind of experiencing both of those. And so, for example, Allison, one of the 5 women I write about in my book, she is desperate to be pregnant. She's undergoing fertility treatments, but she's living in a state that because they banned abortion, when she's trying to get the standard of evidence care for her miscarriage, she has to drive for hours because doctors are so afraid that a miscarriage where there's no fetal heartbeat is going to be deemed an abortion by the state. And then, as you mentioned, the blue state aspect of it, it was really important to me. The 2 of the women that I wrote about, Maggie and Christine, live in New York City, went to the hospital that I talked about, Woodhull. And I was astounded, because the 2 places that I focus on in the book are Alabama and New York City, that the racial disparity in maternal mortality in New York is worse than Alabama. Is more pronounced. At the time that I was writing my book, a Black woman was 8 times likelier to die for pregnancy-related reasons than a white woman. And so the 2 women in my book, Maggie and Christine, one white and one Black, help illustrate that story, and I investigate why that is the case. And that has nothing to do with what the Supreme Court did. It has to do with deeper factors that go back hundreds of years and that we're still tolerating today.
Yeah, I was going to point out that a large section of the book is a medical history of childbirth, and especially how that has impacted and affected Black women. But talk about the medical history aspect of the book and some of the quite shocking things that you talk about as part of that medical history.
When I wanted to understand how we got to this point, where, for example, the statistic I just mentioned about the unforgivable racial disparities in maternal mortality, or how it is that I was reading about a tradition of midwifery that was incredibly difficult to access. And by the way, even though I had 2 great births, my first birth was with an obstetrician who bullied me, who lied to me, and they were relatively minor things in the scheme of what I write about. But the fact that even somebody who reports on this professionally, somebody who did a ton of research, a white, married, middle-class, upper-middle-class woman, if it can happen to me, I quote Tressie Cotton McMillan about how pregnancy can be sort of a piercing of the class veil, where suddenly you're realizing, how dare they treat me like this, because I'm usually treated better by the system.
Right.
And because childbirth is still the number one reason women are hospitalized, for many of us, this is the first time that somebody has treated us like, to quote somebody else in the book, a child animal.
Yep.
So why was that? And that was why I wanted to put in historical context each one of the women's experiences. So there's a lot of kind of happy digressions or tragic digression that happen in the book, where we understand why it is that, for example, Maggie, who moves from Canada, why she's experiencing the system that is so different in America, and why it is that the Black women who are Dr. Yashika Robinson's patients are being treated with such disrespect in hospitals, and why she's fighting to provide a better alternative. And so I traced back the history. For thousands of years, pregnancy and birth across cultures were an experience that was attended to by women in the community. There were trained attendants known as midwives. This is something you find in written and oral tradition for a very long time. This was something that women did together, whether they were actually just supporting or whether they were attending. And it was only in the 19th century that the medical takeover of birth occurred, and it brought with it eventually many wonderful things that I am in favor of.
Right.
But at the time of the 19th century, it was deeply wrapped up in a few things that I think we could agree are not great. One, it was smearing midwives for everything that went wrong, either with maternal or infant mortality, accusing them of being ignorant, superstitious, and causing the deaths of newborns, when at the time it was doctors who were spreading fever that was killing pregnant women in places where they attended them, because we did not yet know about hand washing. Hand washing and antibiotics were responsible for huge reduction in maternal mortality. They also were suspicious of midwives because they would help women plan to space their pregnancies or to prevent them,
Right.
and also help them end their pregnancies. And so when doctors in the United States and in Europe in the late 19th century took over birth, it was partly because the medical profession was trying to show how respectable it was. So they were doing so at the expense of this traditionally female place. They were promising women a safer, cleaner birth in which they called all of the shots. And politically, they were arguing that immigrants and Black women in the South, where these traditions had been kept alive, were a danger to the white race. And they were many of them, extremely concerned with abortion among white women who they wanted to keep having many children and also keep subservient to white men. And so the eugenics history was alongside the history of gynecology being the experimentation on enslaved women. And so I write about Dr. J. Marion Sims, who is called the father of gynecology, whose statue still stands outside of the Alabama state capitol, whose in some ways life-saving discoveries and who invented the speculum, everybody's favorite thing about the visit to the gynecologist, for years experimented on enslaved women who had absolutely no choice as a way of looking for a cure to their fistula, which had been caused by childbirth and which were preventing them from having more children, which was in the economic interest of the slaveholders who held them. And so this history of some women are for experimentation, some women are for the breeding of empire is deeply intertwined with the history of medicine in this country. And this is not to say that today there hasn't been a concerted effort to do better, but it's deeply embedded in our history. And so when I write about Dr. Yashika Robinson, one of the very few Black women who was able to be an abortion provider and also provide birth care and gynecology care to her patients, when she's fighting upstream to be able to give respectful options to her birthing patients, it is in the context of just a few hours away. Women who looked like her were being used for experimentation by white men who then crowned themselves the savior of women. And that paternalism and that lack of respect for the humanity of people who can become pregnant, especially Black women, continues to this day.
We're talking to Irin Carmon about her new book, Unbearable: 5 Women and the Perils of Pregnancy in America, and we'll be right back. Hellions, it's time for some spring cleaning, and I don't just mean the coat closets. Doing your financial spring cleaning can actually be super easy when you let Monarch do your financial spring cleaning for you. One dashboard that gets your entire financial life organized. No more clutter, no more mess, no more logins scattered everywhere, just accounts, investments, property, and more, all in one place. Get your first year of Monarch for half off, just $50 with promo code FRESH. Monarch allows you to look not only at what you've already spent, but also to plan for the future. With Monarch, you can set savings goals, plan for big purchases, and notice spending trends before they become a problem. I can generate cash flow reports that show me what we spent this quarter, this month, what we're probably going to spend next month, and feel prepared, organized, and knowing how to plan for the future. No more surprises and a lot more clarity. Try Monarch. Use code FRESH at monarch.com to get your first year half off at just $50. That's 50% off your first year at monarch.com with code FRESH. All my kids learned to swim when they were little. It was super important to me that they be confident and safe in the water. There was only one problem with that: taking them to swim lessons. I mean, the pools were freezing. There were always cranky adults doing laps right there. And it was definitely not, for any of us, what you would call fun.
Amy, heard. But now there's Goldfish Swim School. Goldfish takes a really thoughtful approach to swim lessons, combining research-based teaching with a warm, kid-friendly environment that actually helps kids thrive in the water.
Every detail at Goldfish is thoughtfully designed to create a golden experience, from shiver-free, warm indoor pools to comfy waiting areas for parents to professionally trained lifeguards on deck.
Goldfish uses an approach called the science of swim play, which combines guided play with proven teaching techniques to help kids learn to swim, build water safety skills, and gain confidence, all at their own pace. Lessons are designed to meet kids exactly where they're at.
If you've been thinking about swim lessons or just wondering where to start, this is a great opportunity. Right now, Goldfish Swim School is offering a waived membership plus your child's first lesson free at participating locations.
Just visit goldfishswimschool.com/free to find a location near you and enroll using promo code FREE.
That's goldfishswimschool.com/free, promo code FREE. My favorite skincare products actually feel more like self-care, like they're so nice to put on and they smell so good that I'm actually happy when I get to that part of my day. And I swear that is how I feel about Osea's anti-aging body balm.
Amy, you are usually the lotions and potions queen on this podcast, but I have to say, hard agree.
Osea's anti-aging body balm is a liquid silk body balm that combines the lasting hydration of a lotion with the firming power of a serum, leaving skin smoother and firmer.
This body balm is clinically tested and designed to deliver visible results you can see and feel.
So we've gotten to use this product for a couple of months now, and I swear I have really noticed firmer and smoother skin, like on the back of my hands. It's like getting a mini spa treatment from head to toe.
Get a spring-worthy glow with clean, clinically tested skincare from Osea. And right now, we have a special discount just for our listeners.
Get 10% off your first order site-wide with code FRESH at OseaMalibu.com.
That's 10% off your first order with code FRESH at OSEAMalibu.com.
I wonder, Irin, if there's also something about like the idea that pregnancy is supposed to be, you know, you come out with a pink bow and a new baby and we don't really talk about what happens in there, right? Because it's shameful, it's gross, it's scary. And so how much do you think that it is being caused by something that I think a lot of us continue to participate in, which is like, I don't really want to know what's going to happen in there? How does that allow these complications to continue?
I think it's the right of every individual to share what they want about their own story. But for me personally, in reporting this book, I wanted to show kind of the full range of pregnancy experiences. There are women in the book who want to be pregnant, who don't want to be pregnant, who have beautiful births, who have life-threatening or taking births. I do think it is changing through platforms like yours and through the internet that people are being more open about the good, the bad, and the ugly. I think the dominant way that we are used to talking about childbirth in particular across classes is as long as you both got home, you know, as long as you've got that healthy baby, I just want him to be healthy. I just want her to be healthy. There is a suppression of like, even if you, I think I even kind of do it myself, like, what are you complaining about? Your baby's doing just fine. First of all, not everybody's baby does just fine, but also you matter, right? So we know also that the dominant culture, not the only one, but the dominant culture of American pregnancy is also like you should not complain. You should only get pregnant if you can afford it and if you can provide a perfect life for your child. And then once you're done being pregnant, they don't care about you. They won't help you. They won't provide anything for you. And they sure as hell do not want to hear your birth story. And I understand why also people don't want to dwell in something that is traumatic and they want to put a pretty bow on it. But I think every generation seems newly shocked by the physiology, by, I would say, the thing that I'm most interested in the book is by how you're treated when you're pregnant.
Yeah.
As if you are, again, to go back to Maggie, one of the women's coinages, child animal. So suddenly you are not the person you were before you were pregnant. You are unable to make decisions for yourself because, well, this could hurt the baby, as if you don't also have the ability to assess, in an informed way what could be right for you and your family and your body. It stops being your body. Your body becomes public property. One of the interesting historical and sociological passages to me in the book is about how this notion of the zero trimester that was coined by the sociologist Miranda Wagner, which is about the idea that even before you're pregnant, when you're in your so-called zero trimester, you have to be absolute perfection in the course of preparing yourself for someday being pregnant. And so that means even don't drink if you even have the potential of someday becoming pregnant. Don't make a single mistake. The quote that you read in the beginning, this notion of like, it won't happen to me.
Right.
When you have women who live in abortion-banned states, who are seeking emergency miscarriage and stillbirth care, who have premature ruptured membranes, who did everything right, that will not save you. And when you have people who are struggling with addiction and they need help getting thrown in jail, that includes middle-class white women now too. And so running afoul of the ideal of the perfect pre-pregnant, the perfect pregnant woman can carry significant penalties. And so I understand why people want to stay silent about it. But I think every time somebody opens up a space to hear about what it's really like, we all feel less alone.
Dobbs obviously hangs over this book and hangs over women in 2025. We have people listening from all over the country, people who are firmly pro-life, firmly pro-choice, who have very strong feelings about abortion. I thought what was fascinating about this book, and something that I think has been so fundamentally missing from the conversation about abortion, is the actual experience of women, this sort of facile way that people will say, like, oh, well, there's adoption, so we don't need. I mean, having had 3 children, it's as if that period of conceiving a child and giving birth to a child is this sort of blurred out part of the story. I mean, I had 2 very complicated pregnancies. I had 1 extremely easy pregnancy, but and I am still having health problems related to having 3 back-to-back pregnancies at an older age. But that part of the pregnancy story seems so erased in the narrative. Terms of like, well, you just have a baby, like the stork brings it to you. No, your organs all get pushed up. You have unrelenting and constant health problems for the rest of your life as a result of pregnancy. That part of the story, I think that you get at really clearly in the book, that blurred part is not okay.
I'm really glad that you brought up that there are people who are listening who call themselves pro-life or who see things differently from how I might personally, because I think there is a lot in the book for you too.
Yes, absolutely. I want to underline that.
Because we all should agree that we should have access to safe pregnancies and births if that's what we choose. And so the fact that 2 women in my book go to a hospital expecting to come home safe and sound with their baby, and only one of them lives to raise her child, is an American catastrophe that is completely preventable and is also completely foreseeable. As you mentioned, lifelong complications are possible even with the best of care. But we have also accepted, most likely because this is care that primarily affects women, that it is okay for some people to get access to substandard care and to be treated like animals when they are pregnant, to be treated as less than human. And so I think there's a woman in my book, Haley, who she becomes pregnant by surprise, and she has on and off struggled with an opioid addiction. And she at first thinks, should I get an abortion? Because she knows that she lives in a county in Alabama where pregnant women who use drugs are often locked up in jail for months, supposedly for the good of their baby. And she comes from a religious, conservative family, and she's married. And ultimately, her mother talks her out of it and says she was worried about Haley meeting her maker. She makes a decision not to have an abortion. She's also not even sure if it's legal at that point. It's actually a few months before Dobbs at this point. Technically, she could have gotten an abortion, but the environment of fear around abortion also contributes. Ultimately, she chooses not to have an abortion. 6 days after she gives birth, she's arrested by her son's hospital bed. Her son is healthy, is experiencing withdrawal from her maintenance medication. She's arrested and she's jailed for 2 months, during which she sleeps on a concrete floor bleeding out because she's postpartum. Now, if Haley had had an abortion, she would not have gone to jail. If Haley had chosen to end that pregnancy, she would not still be fighting for custody of her older daughter and her younger son who was then born. And so she points out that it's this catch-22 because they're punishing women. This is an observation also made by Dorothy Roberts in my book, The Mother of Reproductive Justice. We punish women for outcomes in their pregnancy, but we also want to, or are actually denying them access to abortion. And so instead of offering this mother access to treatment, which when she eventually got it was incredibly helpful, we traumatize her at a point of extreme physical and hormonal and emotional upheaval. We throw her in a jail, in a cell with 3 other pregnant or postpartum women. And this is a jail where they're jailing women for their own good, is what they're saying, and for the good of their babies. But they're denying them access to prenatal care. And this is an extreme example, but this is an example in which some people are saying that they want to encourage a culture where people have babies, a culture of life. But a culture of life is not one that punishes women if they choose to keep their pregnancies, either by jailing them if they have a problem, or taking their children away from them, which also happens to her, even though she's been clean for 2 years, or when they go to give birth, providing an environment that is so disinvested, where the doctor has been working night shifts with long COVID and where there aren't enough nurses and no one pays attention, that what is always going to be a profound physical and emotional experience, even under the best of circumstances, is made so much more punishing. And if we took seriously the first part, if we took seriously how much it transforms you and your body and your health and your life, maybe we would take seriously how you were then treated when you're undergoing this unbelievably vulnerable time in your life that can have lifelong consequences. It can do everything from change your vision to your shoe size to giving you lifelong prolapse.
I wanted to pull on this thread about the criminalization of women's behavior post-Dobbs. I just read a story, it just happened this week, that a woman in Texas had a miscarriage that some maybe in the hospital suspected was self-induced. They weren't sure. She had a miscarriage. She was sent home. The police tracked her movements using her license plate for the next several weeks. And when this was brought before a judge, it was like, well, we were just making sure that she was okay, that she wouldn't need more health care.
That's not what they were doing.
That's not what they were doing, right? Right. And that's not,
Definitely not the police's job.
So I just wanted to ask you about that. Like, do you see the sort of weird, blurry edges of this woman getting thrown in jail or this woman being tracked by the police for things that maybe somebody thinks might be suspicious? How do we push back on that and say this isn't okay? Or is it about making people more aware of those situations?
We are actively discouraging people from seeking medical care, whether it's for a miscarriage, whether it's for addiction, or any other kind of pregnancy care, prenatal care. If we blur the lines between medical care and the police. And so in the case of Haley, the woman I write about in the book, the hospital and the OBGYNs who tested her called the cops. Or in some way, there was a trigger that brought the cops to her hospital bed for her drug test, when what she needed was access to better health care. Who is going to seek access to post-miscarriage care if they're afraid that they're going to be tailed by the police? I have covered cases in which women who were suspected of inducing miscarriage, they had their email records. Now we have so much more of a rich record that can be used against us. Our online histories, whether we seemed happy about our pregnancies, whether we fell down the stairs on purpose or not, whether we drank a glass of wine, an environment in which we have more information about our pregnancies can also be turned against us only when we accept that the police have a role in policing our bodies when we're pregnant. And so in so many of the cases that I've covered, I covered a case in Indiana where a woman was suspected of taking abortion pills later in her pregnancy. Then she realized she went to the hospital because she was hemorrhaging, and the doctor left her side to call the police and join the search party for the dead fetus in a dumpster. And it's a grisly story, but the doctor leaving her side, I thought, was just really stuck in my mind. If you fear that your medical providers are also the cops, you are not going to seek help. And we also, in many of the states that have banned abortion, have created an environment where even extremely well-meaning medical providers are terrified that somebody else is going to call the police on them if they provide that miscarriage care or if they refer somebody to care that isn't legal in the state. And so an environment of suspicion and paranoia and criminalization is not good for anybody's healthcare, but especially not anybody in a vulnerable situation in their pregnancy.
We're talking to Irin Carmon about her new book, Unbearable, and we'll be right back.
Amy, when I'm having a good hair day, it usually makes my whole day better. And that's why on every day, I'm taking Nutrafol.
Nutrafol is the #1 dermatologist-recommended hair growth supplement brand, and it's the #1 hair growth supplement brand personally used by dermatologists. Nutrafol's hair growth supplements are peer-reviewed, NSF certified for sport, and clinically tested.
Nutrafol offers multiple formulas for men and women tailored to different life stages and lifestyle factors, so you get support that's actually right for you. Adding Nutrafol to your daily routine is easy. Order online, no prescription needed, with automated deliveries and free shipping to keep you on track.
Let your hair be one less thing to worry about. See visibly thicker, stronger, faster-growing hair in 3 to 6 months with Nutrafol.
For a limited time, Nutrafol is offering our listeners $10 off your first month subscription and free shipping when you visit Nutrafol.com and enter promo code LAUGHING.
That's Nutrafol.com, spelled Nutrafol.com, promo code LAUGHING.
You know that thing where you get an amazing pair of shoes at a really great price and want to tell everyone about it? Yeah, so do we. Here at Designer Shoe Warehouse, we'll give you something to brag about, like the latest styles from brands you love, or the trends everyone's obsessing over, or shoes that make you feel like, well, you. So go ahead, show off a little. Find shoes that get you at prices that get your budget. Head to your DSW store or DSW.com today. DSW, let us surprise you.
I feel like the book captures really well, as you said, for people who believe whatever they believe about abortion, the consequences of bringing laws into medical care, that the unintended consequences are that on the one side, it's like sperm meets egg, baby grows, pink bow on the head, everything goes amazing. But that in fact, when you take these decisions away from healthcare providers, you end up in situations where people, for example, said, ectopic pregnancies, this doesn't count. This isn't part of that. Of course, an ectopic pregnancy in which the fetus is not viable and the mother's life is incredibly in danger. My sister came extremely close to dying from a ruptured ectopic pregnancy. The treatment for an ectopic pregnancy is abortion, fundamentally. And so to say in a room in DC, well, we're making these laws, the way they're playing out in maternal care centers, the way you join those threads in the book, I think is very eye-opening, and talk about some of those more, what most people would consider, well, that's actual healthcare, as opposed to this kind of cliche of, oh, women who just don't want their babies and don't care.
You talked about unintended consequences. In many cases, I would argue that they are intended consequences that the authors of these laws would like to distance themselves from. So, for example, in the immediate wake of Dobbs, as people were struggling to understand what these incredibly broad laws that had been lying in wait and were now triggered to go into effect, what they meant, there was a lot of scrambling because I think that the anti-abortion movement actually wasn't ready for Dobbs allowing everything.
Yeah, they were the dog that caught the car.
Right.
Yep.
So the initial case that came before the Supreme Court was about a 15-week abortion ban, and they opened the door to all restrictions on abortion from the very beginning. And so I think people were like, wait, oh, we weren't prepared how we were going to message this. But their ultimate plan was suddenly being put into effect. And so I think you mentioned ectopic pregnancy and other emergencies. So the anti-abortion movement simultaneously has repeatedly said that there is never any medical reason for an abortion. We know that that is not medically true. The American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, the American Medical Association, any non-ideological doctor will tell you, of course, there are medical reasons to save a person's life. And confronted with that kind of evidence, some anti-abortion people have said, well, but that's not abortion. So ectopic pregnancy is a great example of this.
Right. That's not an abortion.
Right. They'll be fine.
And nobody is going to be denied care for an ectopic pregnancy. Well, in fact, at least one documented case of a woman in Texas who had an ectopic pregnancy who sued because she was denied care. And many other cases, especially in Texas, where women were forced to wait until they were about to go septic when they had premature ruptures of membranes. The actual lived experience of dozens of women forced to bleed out in parking lots or cry at home in agony, whether there was an early loss or a later one, shows that this idea that people wouldn't be denied emergency care was just a talking point. And one of the things that I do in the book is that I go to the anti-abortion doctors' own sources. They have these directives. APOLOG is the name of this organization, the American Association of Pro-Life OBGYNs. It's not a very well-known group, but it's very influential in the law and in helping pass some of these restrictions and testifying for them and bringing amicus briefs in Supreme Court cases. And what they very clearly say is that, okay, for now, maybe we don't have evidence that we can move an embryo that's implanted somewhere other than a uterus in ectopic pregnancy into the uterus, but we're going to keep trying. So we're going to keep experimenting on women, or we're going to wait as long as we can because we don't want it on our hands that we're intervening with the development of an embryo, even if. So what comes through again and again in reading these directives is that even if there is absolutely no chance of a live birth resulting from this pregnancy situation, So, for example, somebody goes into premature labor, they start leaking amniotic fluid at 16 weeks. The earliest that a baby could survive in a birth is weeks later. And the risk of infection is extremely high. And it's a risk that has actually happened for many people in this situation. So they actually say that rather than do something that it could even look like an abortion, you have to expectant management, watch it for as long as you can, which again raises the risk of infection. Or they even recommend, this part blew my mind as a mother, a C-section. A C-section at a time where it will not save a baby's life, but it will be a tremendous medical intervention on a woman's body. Right? It will affect her future pregnancies and fertility, and it will raise her chance of complications. That's on the cost side. The benefit side is what? No baby is going to be saved by being delivered by C-section at 17 weeks. It's simply not going to survive. And I have stories in the book, Dr. Robinson, of this actually happening, of C-sections being done on young girls who go into labor before the baby can be viable, and they simply do not care. Why? Because they want it to look like just the appearance that the provider, the doctor, did everything they could to save the baby's life, no matter what it cost the mother, and no matter the fact that this baby could never survive. And so what do we learn from that? We learn from that even the theoretical possibility of an embryo, which will never turn into a baby, is more important than the mother's health, wishes, humanity, her autonomy. None of that has been taken into account. And so it's actually, in many ways, not an unintended consequence. It's an intended consequence. It's a valuing of this tiny embryo, perhaps a very wanted pregnancy, but it is the valuing of what is inside the woman's body over her and her health and what is best for her. And at no point is it consult your patient about what she desires here. And so all of these stories, in fact, are a policy choice. They're also a policy choice because the anti-abortion movement believes that if you write too many exceptions into the law, women are going to jump through them willy-nilly to have abortions that they don't approve of. So the disrespect for women's decision-making is inherent in all of these cases. They are not accidents. They're the result of saying that something else is more important than that woman's health or life.
Right. And the people, I'm thinking about the gray areas that this causes means that you're going septic while their doctor's trying to call their lawyer in the hallway to see if this one's okay.
While a committee is sitting there weighing whether how much you have to be close to infection that could prevent you from, that has killed women in Georgia and Texas, and that if you survive could prevent you from having future babies, which is supposed to be a thing that they want.
I always think when we talk about policy and big questions on the podcast of the woman who's listening with 3 kids, pile of laundry, she's sick, she's got dinner to make, and that I like that we talk about policy, but I sometimes think someone's out there listening and going, oh God, this is another thing I have to worry about on top of all the horrible things going on in my own life. But there's a lot in this book. I really, really recommend that people read this book and start thinking about these questions that the book brings up. But for people listening who are like, this is all too much for me, you actually argue there is a better way forward. There is another way possible. How does someone listening to it in that state and just thinks, this is all too big for me? What do you want listeners to take away from this conversation in terms of what's possible?
First, I would say, yes, there is a lot of policy, but most of the book is the stories of these 5 women. And the underlying argument of the book is that all of us who have been or can be pregnant or who love someone who can be or has been pregnant are affected by this, that there's not some other category of woman, and that if you're sitting there with 3 kids, you have your own stories and your stories matter and your experiences and your feelings about them are something that only you can define, right? And so each of these women that I write about has a very different situation and different situations at different courses of her life. Has an abortion, has a really wanted pregnancy. That's the same woman. Has infertility, is fighting for access to a birth center. There is also enormous hope in the book, as much as there are really challenging stories. The 2 people in the book who inspire me the most are one of the 5 women, Dr. Robinson, who is somebody who was a 2-time teen mom, who went to medical school because she wanted to help girls like her, who put her patients at the center to provide them with all different kinds of pregnancy care, and who has had to go to court repeatedly to make that possible. And she's still not abandoning her patients in Alabama. And I'm also really inspired by Jose Perez, who I write about, who is left raising his children without their mother and becomes a maternal health activist. Starts out as a truck driver in a low-income Brooklyn community, never having thought about any of this stuff.
Right.
But because of the experience that I write about in the book, becomes a passionate advocate for women's health. So I don't want anyone to think that it is a totally hopeless situation, because there are individuals in this book who are unbelievably inspiring and who show what is possible. And it's also just a story of human beings and not just about policy, even though I want people to understand why it's happening. I mentioned in the end that I do have a policy laundry list of things that I think would make pregnancy better, like better access to different kinds of providers depending on what you need in your pregnancy, and better postpartum support. But ultimately, this is not a policy book, because what I really want people to do is to think about how each of us, we're people before we get pregnant, we're people when we are pregnant, and we're people when we're mothers, or if we choose not to become mothers. And so it is actually, ultimately, this book, I want people to be left with a deeper understanding of other people's humanity during and around pregnancy. And somebody that you might think that would never be my experience, or I would never do that, or I might judge them, to deeply understand how interconnected our experiences are and how we're up against these large forces and how we deserve to be treated with our full humanity around pregnancy.
We've been talking to Irin Carmon. Her new book is Unbearable: 5 Women and the Perils of Pregnancy in America. We will put the link to the book in the show notes, so you can just click right where you're listening and get this book. Irin, tell our listeners where else they can find you and your work.
My website is irincarmon.com, IRINCARMON. You can find a book tour. You can find where to buy the books there. I'm going to be at first now traveling in the Northeast, but hopefully expanding. And you can find me on Instagram at Irin Carmon.
Irin, thank you for this book. We always say get curious on this podcast, and I think this is an area where people can afford to get curious. So thank you.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate our conversation.
Thank you, Irin.